Welcome, everyone, to our next presentation in Culture and Sports. Thank you so much for joining. The next webinar, if you will, is Athletes and Parents Navigating the Future. So very small topic, no big deal. Have some great people here to talk about this from the parent perspective, from the athlete perspective, from both perspectives. And then, of course, you have people like me who are lawyers. So I'm going to start by introducing myself, and then I'm going to kick it to my fellow panelists. And I'm hoping that we're going to have a lively conversation. If you're joining us from the participants section, please feel free to enter your questions in the chat. We'd love to have a lively discussion because frankly, we're in uncharted territory. So I'm Diana Florence. I am a 29-year lawyer. For the first 27 years of my career, I was a prosecutor, and I specialized in prosecuting companies and executives that killed and maimed workers in the criminal context. So you say, why are you here? Did I make a wrong turn? No. When NIL came into effect in 2021, I was looking for a career change. And I realized that undocumented construction workers and Division I athletes had a remarkable amount in common. And so, long story short, I connected with Bob Boland. We sued the NCAA. You win a case, you become a sports lawyer. And here I am. So I'm thrilled to be amongst this incredible group of panelists. I'm going to kick it over to Chris Sheridan, who can introduce himself and tell us a little about what he's going to talk about. Thanks.
Hi, everybody. I'm Chris Sheridan. I'm a longtime journalist and media executive, 25 years in the industry. I am now the program coordinator for the Sports Media and Storytelling program at Wake Forest University. I also am a leadership and messaging consultant working with executive and brands, primarily on telling their story. And I think one of the big things that's going to happen with NIL for both parents and athletes is their ability to tell their own story. And how important that is in ways that hasn't been before. And I'm really excited to be a part of this conversation. Micah.
A lot of tough acts to follow, but I am here on the athlete side. I was a former athlete at the University of Alabama. I still go here. I'm a junior, but I'm medically retired currently, so I spend a lot of my time as an intern here and just helping out other athletes.
Should I go, Jeanine? Hi, I'm Amanda Beers-Melcher, and I'm the parent of an athlete, but I'm also a television producer, and for the last almost 15 years, I've managed the career of my son, who was an actor, who was a child actor. And my daughter, who is 25, about to be 26, is an influencer. She makes her living off of TikTok, a Columbia graduate in theater, who now has her own platform that is her main source of income. I have a little bit of insight about the demands that having a social media platform could potentially put on an athlete, and a lot of experience worrying about how to protect my child's name, image, and likeness, and physical self as the parent as a manager, as a momager of a child actor. I'm excited to be here, and thank you for having me. And I hope I can provide an interesting perspective on some of the issues that we're talking about today.
Thank you. Jeanine?
Thank you. Hi, everyone. Good afternoon or good morning, as the case may be. Good evening, as the case may be. I'm Jeanine D'Anibal. I am a counseling psychologist with about almost 30 years of experience of doing mental health work in various sectors. Currently, I'm the Associate Athletic Director of Psychological Health and Performance at the University of Colorado Boulder, where I oversee our mental health and performance improvement kind of clinic. And I guess most of my career, most of the last 30 years, I have spent working in talking about what I call the stress trauma continuum in mental health, for everything from normal stress responses to traumatic stress and everything in between. And I look forward to this discussion because, at least in my view, a lot of it, of the good and the bad and the challenges, is based in stress. It's based in a stress response. So look forward to kind of hearing what my fellow panelists have to say and contributing where I can.
Great. Mark?
Hi, I'm Mark Eisenberg. I feel like I've worn several hats. I wrote several publications for the athlete community. I'm a financial advisor by day, really trying to be an advocate for athletes. So just to be able to pull back the curtains on this industry and bring people, athletes, parents, into this sausage factory, and make sure that they understand the world that they inhabit and figure out ways that they can take advantage of the opportunities. And probably more of the discussion is, how do you avoid the dangers? And then really that pivot to, what is it that the world of college athletics would look like if college athletes had a legitimate seat at the table? So looking forward to engaging around NIL and what we can do to advocate for this community.
Amazing. Last but not least, my fellow Tar Heel, George Lynch.
Hello, everyone. Glad to be a part of this group. And George Lynch, 93 national championship title at UNC Chapel Hill, first round draft pick of the Los Angeles Lakers. And my third act is I'm a senior business advisor for MAI Capital, which is a wealth management group. And Diana and I started our own sports company to help athletes through all this new NIL space. And I get on my mother all the time. I said I was born 30 years too early because, reaching all those accolades, I could have really, really capitalized off today's sports circle.
Mm-hmm. Awesome. Great to have all of you. So why don't we kick it right off? So in 2021, on July 1st, the world changed, right? Suddenly, all the rules that were sort of coming into effect, all the laws in the different states, starting with California, came into effect, where athletes were suddenly allowed to be compensated. Maybe we could start with the athletes here. Maybe Micah, maybe you can talk about, so I guess you were a senior, maybe. Am I counting correctly? Were you a senior when that?
Junior, actually.
You were a junior in high school. My gosh, you're so young.
Yeah.
Tell us a little bit about, you were obviously already a pretty good volleyball player as a junior. You didn't start, I'm presuming, your junior year. So curious, how you could maybe tell us a little bit about how this new world changed, if at all, the way you approached your recruiting and your parents as well.
For sure. Actually, there was a lot of rule change in volleyball specifically. I remember going from getting full scholarship offers in 8th grade to a rule change where they can't contact me until junior or senior year. So I think around the time of the NIL change, I was actually in the process of making all of my decisions, with COVID on top of that. Not having to get to travel and have my official visits paid for really played a lot of big factors in that. But just thinking about NIL, it wasn't a factor to start at all. I remember I had a spreadsheet on Google Docs of all the schools I liked, all the schools that wanted me, and why I liked them. And then all of a sudden, a school called the University of Alabama, that was at the bottom of my list, shot to the top, because they were one of the first schools to really capitalize on NIL and show me what my potential as a volleyball player could be. And my father, he was always very, volleyball is what's going to get you there, not your name, image, and likeness. However, coming where I am from, I'm in a position where I have to provide for my family that is back home. And that's when a school like Alabama really shot to the top and showed me that they can take me places outside of my sport and take me further. So even as a female athlete, that NIL change was a heavy influence. And so with my peers, especially my male peers, that influence was times 100 when that rule change came.
Amazing. Amanda, can you tell us, as a parent going through maybe somewhat similar time with your son? I don't know if he was maybe a little older.
No, he's the same age actually.
Oh, okay.
Our situation was is a little bit different. Was a little bit different in that so uh, so my son was a child actor, a fairly successful child actor. So he was a little bit famous by the time he was looking at schools. And he had an interesting relationship with the idea of celebrity. He was, as a middle schooler, sort of thrown into a situation where little girls would chase him down the street and he couldn't go to a restaurant, or, you know, like all of the things that you hear about child stars, the downside of fame, he had experienced, and we did protect him from that as much as possible. But he did have, so our situation is quite different than other people's, where people were saying to him, "Oh yeah, you're going to have great opportunities, you know, for NIL," and he was more cautious or more wary about what that was going to look like, because for him, his sport had always been a place to escape from, a place where people didn't care who he was, they just cared how well he played, right? So it was a place to be a normal kid and to keep those two worlds separate. So his experience was when he got to college, he committed very early. Again, the rules changed after the fact, so it was after 8th grade. He knew where he was going to go, and we had a very narrow list. We you know, his sister was at Columbia. His husband and I had gone to Brown. My husband and I had gone to Brown, and we were like, you have to go to a school with top academics. And so, you know, he wanted to go. He wanted to prioritize sports. We kind of found a compromise in a school that fit in UCLA. But you know, one thing that we learned is that you can't always predict the future, and you know, coaching changes happen, and maybe things that you thought were kind of agreed upon weren't, you know, necessarily agreed upon. So he found himself with in a new situation with, you know, sort of different ideas about how his platform would be used, how his celebrity would be used, and it caused a lot of tension for him because. You know, to be frank, there were issues with the program that could damage his reputation, his NIL for his real career, that he didn't want to be associated with. And as much as you're told that the schools or the coaches don't have, you know, any hand in NIL, that is in fact not the case. And you know, so I think the bigger lesson, since my son is not all that applicable, is that NIL offers amazing opportunities for a lot of people if that's what you want your college experience to look like. But it's a full-time job. If we're talking about real NIL, and we're talking about, you know, having a social media platform. You also do lose, you do sacrifice. There is a downside to celebrity in terms of your privacy, in terms of the way you're viewed. And also there is an added burden of, once you are in the public eye, having an added responsibility to protect your image publicly. And you can't control what your teammates are doing or saying. You can't control what your coach is doing or saying, but their actions can damage your brand, right? So anyway, that's, I think, bigger picture, that's, you know, one of the things that I've kind of discovered through this whole process with my son.
Janine, perhaps maybe you can jump in regarding like what you've seen in terms of how NIL and the new world that we're living in for college athletes. It's stressful enough to be a Division I athlete, or even a Division III athlete for that matter, and a full-time student. Now you also have to, you make money, and you have, and many students, athletes have the additional pressures of having to support their family, like Micah. So can you maybe talk a little bit to how that's how you've seen a change since NIL has come into effect?
Well, I think you just really spoke to it, Diana. I mean, at baseline, right? Student athletes have so many stressors and pressures on them first of all, just as a college student living in the world, right? Then the specific pressures of competing, doing their sport, minimum 20 hours a week, managing that with their academic, coursework, relationship, family pressures. But now I think there's just more choices to be made. And even when the choices are good choices, like if any of us who've had to recently maybe buy a house or buy a car or think about changing jobs, and those choices and options might even be good and attractive choices and things that we're looking forward to, they can be stressful and carry with it a lot of pressure to sort through things, potential impacts of those choices. So that's now layered on top of things that were already pressure packed for student athletes. Then I want to speak to specifically what Micah did such a good job of articulating, particularly the student athlete that might have, that maybe they're carrying some financial pressure for their family, extended family, whoever. Now it's not just about them, but they are now making these choices for a lot of people, and those people may not even be united in what they think the student athlete should do. So now it's more voices potentially in that student athlete's ear. So I just think this adds another really significant layer on top of stress. And I think, and just will speak to the need for more supports for our student athletes to navigate all this.
Forgot I was muted. Sorry. Mark, in your practice, you're a financial advisor. Are you working and are you seeing some of these stressors and, the kind of pressures that athletes now face at such a young level? I know you've worked with professional athletes like George, but have you worked on the college level and seen this sort of trickle down, if you will?
Yeah, and I think that, it's one of those things where welcome to the real world, and just think, make sure that people understand that, NIL is not a mandate. It's really an enhancement of the collegiate experience. And I always try to tell people that NIL should be what comes after you've taken care of business in the classroom, your responsibilities to yourself as an athlete and to the team, and then that you're in a good mental place. And then if you feel like that you have the additional bandwidth to engage around, real NIL, then, go for it. So yeah, it's certainly an added layer, as we talked about, but it's not like anybody's prepared to deal with adulting. It's one of those things where if you can, get yourself acclimated to it, we try to give them as much education as possible and help them make the connection between what we're saying and why it's in their best interest. I would rather athletes go through this, or anybody at an earlier age. Hopefully they know how to take advantage of the opportunities and avoid the dangers. But if they're going to screw up, let's get it, out of the way earlier in life. So I have no issues with, athletes making this kind of money. I remember George was talking about 1993. That was my first Final Four. And certainly he came along at an amazing time in college athletics. But, the NCAA had made all these rules that prevented athletes. That was the year of the timeout and the Fab Five. So, now it's more like what is it that we would get if we have a legitimate seat at the table? And it's certainly some heady times. And, it's one of those things where we just need more education, more understanding of what athletes are going through. And, there'll be some hiccups along the way, as we've already seen, but we're getting closer to where I think would be closer to a fair bargain for the quid pro quo of an athletic scholarship.
George, can you imagine what the NIL you could have made from when you trapped Jalen Rose in the corner?
I would have been on all type of commercials and little, movie scripts and things like that, just for calling the timeout commercial. But yeah, I would have definitely enjoyed it.
Chris, do you want to sort of weigh in on this?
Yeah, I think the two things that have struck me first about the conversation and also my experience at Wake and in the classroom with athletes is two things. One, NIL has broadened the conversation, right? So time was when one or two players on a team might get noticed by somebody who might get at some point a scholarship or a chance to play. And those people are the ones who people would pay attention to. Now it's everybody. With NIL, any player can cash in on that or leverage that. So now all of a sudden the conversation that was limited to one or two players, the star players on a team, has now broadened out to everybody. So now people who didn't think this was about them, it's now about you, both good and bad, right? So that responsibility of figuring out those questions are really important. They're questions for everybody. In my opinion, every athlete should have their own website and should have their own stuff, even if they don't want to go full into NIL. But start crafting your brand, right? Because that's going to be really important. Another thing you're already starting to see is that the universities that you're at matter. There are some really big universities who have NIL figured out, and it is a machine, and there's millions and millions of dollars. Then you have smaller schools. Then you have a school like Wake, which is sort of in the middle, trying to figure out what it wants to do. So it's going to be very interesting to see how this all plays out, because it's different from campus to campus. Some of the issues and some of the rules are the same, but it is a very different conversation depending on where you go, and that will either ratchet up or ratchet down the pressure, or ratchet up or ratchet down the options.
Micah, I'd love to actually get your take on this, because one of I think the misimpressions many people have is that NIL is only about male revenue generating sports, and in fact we know that as Amanda's daughter is making her living, she's an Ivy League grad and she's making her living on TikTok, and we know that many of the most sort of successful athletes in the NIL space are actually women. Can you talk a little bit about that?
I actually just did a panel talking about something similar with this with some of my peers here. And we've noticed that the biggest difference between male and female NIL is a man, he appears to have more success in NIL if his skill is there or he's just on the right team. But when I see the girls really making the big bucks, either they are top 3 in their respective sport and their talent is so rare and niche, or they're really able to capitalize on their own personal brand. But it's not a personal brand that has been created within college necessarily. It's something that they have been crafting since high school. So that's why we're talking about the NIL conversation now includes everyone, not just the star players. The most successful NIL female athletes that I have seen, they're the people that have been crafting their image, crafting their social media since high school. And they already come in with that verification sticker, with that comma in their followers. And the girls just kind of have to get at it a lot sooner than the boys do, because that's just where it's at. And it's still really a male dominated space, especially with what sport you play and how much revenue it generates.
I'm curious because your sport, volleyball, it might just be me because Carolina is pretty good this year, but I've noticed, though, I don't think so. I think volleyball is legitimately, I think it's the next sort of hot sport. I think there's a lot of attention. Was it Nebraska that sold out the football stadium? Yeah. I mean, so I do think, so I wonder, do you think the fact that NIL is, sort of has become a thing and volleyball has become a thing, has any kind of connection, or is that just a coincidence?
Well, shout out North Carolina volleyball. I've got 5 great friends on that team, so they are looking pretty good this year. But I think as we've seen it with women's basketball, Angel Reese, the Caitlin Clark effect, all of that, I'm telling you guys right now, volleyball is the next big thing. And I think a lot of that has to do with, whether we want to say it or not, beautiful girls in small shorts sells, and that's why a lot of people come to my games. And I think volleyball has a little bit of the aspect as maybe men's basketball, where it's a very intimate sport. You are right there, you see all the facial expressions, you see everything. And I think as girls, as I said before, it's all about personal brand. And I think volleyball, I know for me personally, I was getting noticed for just being me, showing my personality, showing my character on the court before I was noticed for putting points up. So I think really just having a personal connection to players and to athletics shines the most in volleyball. And that's why it's going to be one of the more successful NIL spaces.
Amazing. So we have an audience question. I'm just going to throw it to the panel. Anyone who can jump in. So if an athlete is making $150,000 playing their sport, the audience member wants to know, what does that mean for their education? Is their education second class now because they're making all this money?
I'll take that.
I'm not sure. Yep.
Okay, so I think that it's not one size fits all. There's people who can jump to their own conclusions about what it means, or does it diminish the educational opportunities. But I think each situation is different. And if an athlete has the opportunity and the market value to compensate him or her to the tune of $150,000, it's up to them to how they want to prioritize academics, athletics, and the overall college experience. So I think that certainly there'll be pundits out there that will take a paternalistic view of all of this and say it's bad. And then when you look at the statistics in our country, that half of our population is not able to build material net worth, and here you have an opportunity to jumpstart your wealth building journey at a very early age. That to me is an unbelievable positive, and hopefully they have a support system that encourages them to both be a college athlete and maximize that aspect, and then also take advantage of the academic opportunities at the same time, and they'll be fine.
Awesome. Chris, did you want to say something?
Yeah, I was just going to say, I think from my experience, in front of the classroom and dealing with athletes in my class all the time, when that NIL burden is more of a time burden, right? If it takes them away from a class, if it takes them away from their attention, if they start, not doing their assignments, then they're going to have trouble. So for me, it's like, does the fact that they're making this much money deflate their education? Not if they're doing it right. I think, as Mark talked about before, you're ideally layering this, right? So first you're good at your sport, then you're showing that you're able to handle a rigorous academic schedule, and then if you have the bandwidth and the support to enter into these other arrangements, I think it's fine. And I think the other thing to remember, and I remind my students of this all the time whenever we start talking about this, is athletes are one play away from never playing again. So as we start talking about, should they be cashing in and should they be taking the money and doing all that, just remember, every athlete, no matter the sport, they are one play away from never playing again. And I just think that's something that has to be thought of and thought about remembered in this conversation.
Yeah, Mike,
and I would like to add something to that too. I think back in the day when I was coming up as a child, your parents didn't think that you could multitask and do multiple things. But now, me being in the space and watching and having younger kids myself that manage both social media, these new phones and tablets, kids are able to manage both. And like I said, if they can manage their time, training has been more efficient, where athletes aren't asked to be on the court for 8 hours. They can get more done in 2 hours. I think it's just all about time management.
George, you once told me that Dean Smith, when you were getting ready to graduate and go pro, that he had sort of connected you with people that could guide you. Do you feel like if you had, besides the obvious that you would have gotten money, which would have been great, do you feel that the learning curve would have been easier had you had been dealing with this as a freshman, or do you think it was better that you dealt with this at 22 in terms of making money?
I think I was put in a good situation. Like Michael said, I was, my first contract, I was asked to support and take care of my family members. But luckily, I was able to go to the University of North Carolina, where Dean Smith made sure that any player that had potential to be a professional athlete sat down in front of 5 financial advisors and 5 agents and the screening process with you, basically held your hand so you couldn't make a mistake. So I think if athletes and coaches and universities are able to assist their athletes in making the right decision, because there are a lot of crooked people out there that looks to take advantage of athletes, I think that makes the process a lot easier.
Micah, did you want to weigh in on this? I think you had raised your hand.
I was going to say that Mr. Chris brought up an excellent point of every athlete is one play away from never playing again. And I will say I'm pretty hard-headed, but I like to call it dedication. I've had 7 knee surgeries before choosing to medically retire. And a lot of female athletes, we know that pro does not bring in the big bucks like it does for male sports. So that's why we tend to put more of our eggs in the basket of NIL. But as it continues to develop even more male athletes, they're seeing CTE, they're seeing ACL tears, and they're saying, why am I gonna do this to my body and continue to hurt myself when I can make my money now? And when I don't have to put that huge gamble on the NFL or the NBA, why not just do it now? And I think when we talk about how much you make in NIL and if that's taking away from your schoolwork, we need to look at if they're making that money truly based off of their name, image, and likeness, or if it's media that they're putting out. Because if you have a podcast, if you're a content creator, that's when you start taking hours and hours away from your training time, your wellness time, everything else that you have on your plate as a student athlete in order to make that money. So it's really, I guess, are you profiting off of yourself and your play and how you are doing it, or do you have something else on the side that you have as your brand?
Amanda, maybe you can jump in on this, because I feel like as a parent, and especially because you've alluded to a not such a great experience for your son on some of this, you know, how can, you know, what can parents do to make sure that their kids are protected while also letting them adult, right? Giving that balance of advise, but not do it for them.
Well, I'll say to the question that the audience members raised about the actual, you know, $150,000. It kind of depends on what Micah was saying, how that money is earned, right? So managing my son's career, I have a little bit of an idea of like how, you know, what gives you the most bang for your buck, right? Like, so are we talking a national commercial? Okay, that's not a huge time commitment, right? So you're going for the fitting. Maybe it's a 1-day shoot. It will be a long shoot, at most a 2-day shoot, right? And then you get your session fee. So that's only like $600, but the residuals, if it's a national commercial, one national commercial can pay $90,000, right? So, you know, then again, if you are building a TikTok platform, that's going to be a lucrative TikTok platform, it is a full-time job, right? So no one is going to, you know, unless you have a certain number of followers, you're not going to exact a high enough price to build $150,000, $5,000 at a time, or $2,000 at a time, or whatever, you know, a brand deal for that platform is playing. So when we're talking about fake NIL, where it's like we're using it as an inducement to go to a school or a program, that's one thing. But if we're talking real NIL and that level of money, you either are at a level where you can make that money in a one-shot deal, right? Or you're having to do something like a podcast or some kind of social media platform. That, you know, I know that, you know, for my son, when he was even, you know, sort of getting some pressure to do this, entertaining the idea of doing this, his sister was like, that's bananas. Like, you're in school for 4 years, like, get your education. Like, I do this every day, 12 hours a day to support myself, you know? So it kind of depends on specific. I think we have to be specific about what we're talking about. And as parents, we have to look specifically at, like, what are you being asked to do for this NIL money? You know, what does it entail? What time is it? How you know, where are you going to fit it in? You know, if it's a print campaign, okay, that's probably, you know, only a day or so, but do you have 3 hours in the middle of your day between classes and practice to go do the fitting? Do you have the 12-hour shoot because they are going to want to get good light in the morning, but they're going to want to get that, you know, sunset shot in the afternoon. Like, so, you know, it's, I think that there's a real misunderstanding from people who haven't, you know, been on the, you know, on the business of what we're talking about in terms of time and hours. And, you know, maybe there needs to be more education around that.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things I'd love to sort of highlight too is, you know, and we've seen it in the news right now with the UNLV quarterback, right, who is in the midst of fighting his school, his coach, the media, lots of fights of what he was promised, and you know whether there's anything enforceable. So Bob Boland and I, you know, we're lawyers, and we represented one athlete who was promised not so much in this context, just about $40,000. And he was, you know, assured by coaches, collectives, no, don't put it in writing. And, you know, he wanted to play. And, you know, luckily he had the text messages, and also Bob and I can be a little bit mean when you mess with our clients. So we were able to get him his money, but the reality is that I think that one of the things I think must be very challenging for both athletes and parents to navigate, right, without having a lawyer, happy to represent whoever needs me. But, you know, reality is, you know, there is a lot of pressure in the moment to be, you know, friendly and nice. And I'm not going to sign things. But the reality is, when things don't go so well, then you can be on the other side of it. And if there's nothing in writing, it's very difficult to enforce. So I think that that's something that we need to be sort of thinking about. Not that everyone needs to hire a lawyer, but we need to build, you know, sort of, you know, support structures. And maybe that's something that Janine, you know, part of what you're doing is at universities, or low-cost lawyers that can be on call so that athletes aren't pressured. Mike, I think you wanted to sort of jump in on this, so I don't want to deprive you of that before we change topics. You're muted.
Oh, I was just gonna say I'm a chatterbox, so I want to jump in on everything, but I really think that's a great point. Everyone knows before NIL, one of the most difficult parts of the recruiting process is not knowing if your head coach is lying to you, because they will say absolutely anything to get you to sign that commitment to their school. And NIL has added such another layer, because you have your coach, you know, they make promises about playing time, your living, how much your stipend will be, team culture, anything. And then on top of that, we have them bringing in money. And a lot of the times, you're right, they don't want to put it in writing. And we need better things to educate parents and players, I feel, because a lot of that time, those conversations about NIL and money are happening without a parent present. And they want to have those conversations with a child who is probably, again, I told you, I was in 8th grade. They're asking me what I want to major in college. I don't know. So definitely having those conversations in the context of a parent being there to protect you with lawyers is very important in the future.
Yeah, Janine, have you, is this something that's come up? Have, you know, students come to you to talk about sort of feeling that maybe they were misled or they felt pressured, and how have you been able to navigate that at Colorado? I mean, you have one of the most high-profile coaches in the country there, so there's been a lot of stuff in the news. I won't single it out. I think everyone knows what I'm talking about.
Yeah, and you know, due to the nature of confidentiality, I can't speak to any specifics in that. But I think that's safe to say, though, it's kind of the point I was making. Like, I kind of actually want to circle back that, yes, I do believe that probably some athletes can handle this, right? And do handle it well. And other athletes who might already be experiencing other kinds of pressures already, I think could also struggle. So we just have to make sure we're building in those supports. I do want to speak to the parent piece, though. Are we gonna segue into the parent piece? Is this a good segue?
I think you're the segue. You're the segue.
Okay. Yeah. So, okay, so I'm going to take a kind of a weird angle on this, but first pulling way back in terms of parenting. I don't know how many of you followed the report that came out from the Surgeon General back in, I think it was the end of August of this year. The Surgeon General issued a warning, a public health warning that is usually reserved for special things like gun violence or cigarette use. Okay, and they talked about the stress of parenting as a public health crisis. So let's just take that into account for a minute. Those of you maybe who are parents can already be like, yeah, right, what, we knew that. But it's a real thing that just being a parent in this day and age is stressful. Then you enter, supporting a child going through college with those, firsts, and starting to individuate from parents and make their way and make their choices. And then you add in this space of, okay, money and finance and lawyers and decisions, right? And we've talked about the stress for student athletes, but for parents, to have to learn that space and navigating that space, I think is a whole different realm that's brand new. And this is all new. And so I think as we talk about supporting student athletes, I think we also want to talk about supporting parents about knowing what to do and how to do it.
No, that's a great point. Anyone want to jump in on that? Maybe Amanda, since you are in that space.
Well, I will say that as somebody who navigated a child actor through Hollywood, which is known to be the most exploitative and dangerous industry for children, navigating 2 years of D1 athletics was 1,000 times more difficult and more dangerous for him. At least as a child actor in California, there were rules to protect him. There were, we were never trapped. And in fact, as I managed him as a child, we never signed a long-term contract. We always, if he were on a show, he was a recurring guest, not a series regular, because I wanted to have him maintain control of how he spent his time because he was a child. We were very surprised to discover that level of being able to opt in or out. And I'm not talking about going to practice or not going to practice. I'm just talking about the level of control over daily activities. And in the case of UCLA, whether or not he would even be able to stay at school if he chose to stop playing his sport, which I think is not well known. But during, in a response to Varsity Blues, UCLA instituted a 2-year minimum commitment for scholarship and non-scholarship athletes. If you stop playing your sport before junior year, you are automatically expelled from UCLA. They rescind your admission. This only applies to athletes who go through special admission. So actors, musicians, all the other people who apply to UCLA under this separate admissions, it doesn't apply to them. It's just athletes. So when you find yourself in a situation that maybe isn't allowing time for your academic pursuits or your other interests, or you're just unhappy doing it, you are, at least in our case, trapped for half of your college career, or you can either transfer or you can, be expelled from UCLA. So that level of forced control, in all of the years where we were maneuvering in Hollywood, we never felt that level of powerlessness that we felt during his first 2 years at UCLA. And I will also just throw out there as an aside to that, I think that that policy itself is inherently racist because it doesn't apply to other special admits who are predominantly white students, but this provisional conditional admission applies to just athletes. So I think that injustice is what got me involved in this space and what opened my eyes to the fact that this is exploitative in a way that even something that child stars known to be exploitative it's more exploitative than that.
Before we go to Mark, I just want to say, because I don't want to forget this point, you know, one of the things though that when you just mentioned the parallels between being a child actor and being a student athlete, what strikes me though is that the rules that are so protective of child actors, many of them, you know, came out of tragedy. I mean, many of them in this are too young to remember the Twilight Zone movie and the children that were killed. But many of those protections came out of or unscrupulous managers taking advantage of kids. So what's interesting is that with the, in my view, the collapse essentially of any sort of enforcement structure, with the NCAA being sort of toothless, we're living in a world where they're really, you know, these rules are coming up to supposedly protect, but they're not, as you mentioned, there are inherent issues with them. So I think it's interesting that the parallels with student athletes and the world that we now live in, there are very few rules, and those sometimes rules can be protective, but you need a structure in place, and you know, in order to enforce them as well. But Mark, I know you wanted to weigh in, so let me stop talking and throw.
Yeah. Thank you. I think a lot of this goes back to almost like the original lie of the NCAA, going back to Walter Byers, that athletes are students, not employees. So when they rolled out NIL 1.0, there was a lot of people saying, oh, this is awesome. And in many ways, it really is. But then they put along the policies that said no inducements, no pay for play. And what they, in essence, did was take all the things that the market forces were ultimately going to pick up on and got it off of the accounting books of college athletics. So now that's, I think, in many ways how we get this free-for-all for, you know, how to protect athletes in this situation. And so, you know, again, I think the ability to be intellectually honest about the fact that there's two types of NIL. I don't like the phraseology, even fake NIL, because ultimately that was pay for play that, you know, they've disguised and dressed up as NIL, when we would be much better off. And I think I saw it in the comment from Andy Schwartz, is that, you know, if we're so concerned about the time suck of NIL, then let's look to direct compensation for that would value what college athletes are bringing to the table. So again, I think that the ability to bring it in-house rather than to put it as a third party and say it's the Wild West. Well, it's the Wild West because you're not allowing the natural market forces and the laws and the protections that would follow from that to take place.
Sure. And there's also no representation of all athletes, right? So if you're lucky enough to be a client of, you know, Bob and mine, right, you're going to get great representation. If you don't have the ability to have a lawyer, or you don't know someone who can advocate, or your parent is just not in a position to do that, that athlete is going to be reliant on luck and hope that the institution is a good one, is not going to take advantage and being lucky. And nothing in this space should rely on luck. I mean, the point of education, right, is giving people the tools to move forward, and shouldn't just be in the classroom, it should also be on the playing fields as well. So I couldn't agree more. Anyone else want to jump in? We have about 9 minutes left, so I definitely want to make sure everyone gets their say. Anyone else want to jump in here? Okay, I think we have a question. Let's see. This is a question for Chris. Being the program director for Wake Forest, how does NIL affect the university media in relation to using the athlete in their programming or marketing content for the university to the public?
So, boy, I will be straight up and say I don't know what the official rules are and what they sign off on. I will say what I tell my student athletes is, and this is why I do think, to Mark's point, that some of the nomenclature is just a little bit dishonest. And what I tell my students and student athletes is, every time you put on your jersey, you are a public relations representative for the university. Now, we can argue about how you should be compensated for that. We can argue about, you know, I'm not smart enough to figure out what compensation should look like. When I want to get my students thinking and get their heads spinning around, I will make the argument that as an academic institution, we should be paying for effort, not outcome, meaning that the athletes in the non-revenue sports are spending just as much time in the gym. They're spending just as much time in the classroom. They're juggling just as much. If we're going to start paying athletes, shouldn't we be paying on effort and not on that outcome in terms of revenue generating sports? I think it's just an interesting intellectual argument. But I think the notion of athletes, again, when they put on that uniform, they are public relations representatives for the university. And again, how you treat them as athletes, but when they're going to the hospital, and we have a lot of athletes right now doing wonderful work, trying to raise money and do events for the people in Western North Carolina who've been so hardly hit. That's public relations for the university, and we should not be naive as to what that is. And there should be some sort of recognition for that, because that's very much a part of it.
Micah, there's a question for you in the chat. How in touch are student athletes with financial literacy with NIL and knowing how to manage their money and pay taxes on it, et cetera? Do you feel there's enough awareness on this sold to the athlete in the recruiting process, or I guess along the way?
Well, again, I think it all goes back to your institution, because I'm currently an intern for the Student Athlete Enhancement Department at Alabama, and I think we do it, not being biased, I think we do it the best out of anyone. We have our financial literacy event coming up, and all of the information within that course is extremely valuable in navigating student athlete NIL, but also finances after athletics. But there's just a big issue across all Power Fives of they're not showing up unless it's mandatory. So I think there is the opportunity for a lot of athletes to become financially literate, but again, they're not showing up unless it's mandatory. And a lot of it, in the student athlete world, I think it's going to have to fall on the university, because a lot of the top athletes who have like that grittiness, the competitiveness that gets noticed within NIL, they didn't just come out like that for no reason. They kind of have that instilled in them from what they went through pre-college athletics. And a lot of that has to do with their upbringing. And I know for me personally, I'm not in a position where my family can speak to me about taxes. I am the first person in my family to pay taxes. So as we're talking about, parenting an athlete is extremely stressful, because I have my father across the country trying to make sure that I'm in contact with lawyers to get my taxes paid, because I had NIL deals. And I don't know how to navigate my taxes, neither does he. So a lot of it has to come, to the university, and you have to be the athlete willing to stand up for yourself and reach out for that help, and know that you have to be financially literate, that you have to pay your taxes, that you're now an adult. And I think a lot of institutions, if they do have that type of stuff in place, I don't think they're going out of their way to get those athletes that maybe aren't making millions. I think they just kind of have their top athletes that they know are really having high income that they need to watch. But even people that are in the mid to low level, they still are making income. They still have to pay taxes. And what do we do if you're not helping us?
Sure. Do you feel like, though, with the increase in NIL, we've seen, for example, a number of players at the University of Georgia have been arrested lately, some of them on the football team, I think. And do you think that there's a correlation between the amount of money and perhaps having access to, more things at a younger age? I mean, do you think there's any correlation, or do you think that would have happened regardless?
Honestly, I will say the SEC has had their fair share of scandals this year, and I do think that there is correlation with NIL, because a lot of people, I will say in the male-dominated sports, they want to live that fast life with the cars, the money, the stuff they shouldn't be getting into, but they envision that life in the NFL. And now it feels like we're bringing aspects of the NFL, aspects of things that they're chasing for, we're bringing it down to college athletics. And that's kind of supposed to be what we're saying don't get into, but now it's here. And I think with a lot of those people, it's not a lack of financial literacy. It's, at the end of the day, they can't hold on to your money for you. They can tell you what to do, how to do it, but they can't keep the money. They can't monitor it. It's in your bank account. And that's when I think it slips through the cracks.
It seems like
I would like to
ahead,
add
Mark.
something to that. I think being an athlete, a lot of times these coaches recruit kids without recruiting their character. And, you know, you have these 7 athletes at Georgia. They probably got 100 athletes on the team, just on the football team. So it's that one bad apple gives a lot of athletes a bad rap. You know, you have so many guys that are doing the right thing. So we have to be careful about looping, you know, the 7 athletes at Georgia who got arrested this year with the 100 athletes or 100 plus athletes on that team. And I think it comes down to character. I think it comes down to your team that's around you, your family support. If you have yes men in your circle, or if you have people who's going to speak the truth. And a lot of times these athletes, once they start making money, they are the provider for the family. So no one is going to tell them no or what they should hear. And it comes down to, you know, the captains in that locker room, you know, the leaders on that team. And if a coach is willing to save a kid instead of saving a game, you know, those issues had to have started, you know, when those kids were in high school, because I'm sure they all treated, you know, like gods. You know, I didn't have NIL, but once I was known that I had a chance of being a D1 athlete, I was treated differently. But I had a father who was, you know, 6'6", 280 pounds, that wasn't going to let me get out of line. So it all comes down to your upbringing and character issues and what the coach in that locker room allows.
Do you think the universities should be doing more to, you know, help with decision making and understanding legal pitfalls? In addition to that financial literacy, you have to pay taxes. Understand.
You know, I coached on all levels. Some universities don't have the resources, but it comes back to the guy who's giving out that playing time, who's allowing kids to speed up and down the highway. You know, the coaches, and it's a big responsibility for that coach, but the coach is getting paid $10 million a year to lead his football team or basketball team or whatever sport he's playing. So I think it falls back on the responsible leaders. I remember Coach Smith in my front room telling my parents that he's going to make sure that I graduate and he's going to make sure I go to church on Sundays. So, you know, he kept us in line, and he was a man of his word. If we didn't do what was required from the university or the basketball team, you weren't going to play. I don't care how good you were. And so coaches have to stand on what they believe in. And some coaches, you know, would rather win football games than raise great young men that's going to be great citizens in the community.
We have 2 more minutes. I see 2 hands up. So let's try to get Mark, and then maybe Michael will close us out. Thank you. This has been an amazing. I think we could talk for another 2 hours. So go ahead, Mark.
I think that, I mean, we have to recognize that there's a lot of misaligned interest in the college athletic ecosystem. So certainly, as somebody who's been doing financial education long before NIL became a thing, and back then it was more aspirational. This is what you need to know when you make it. Now we have opportunities to convert their value to real economic opportunities. It's a real difficult time in this whole in this era, because yes, we need more education, but what we don't need is a strong hand of an athletic department or an institution, because there's university liability of telling them what to do. So obviously we want better, meaningful education that really gets to the heart of what's going on. And then, as George said, is just to have a coach that is transformational, that really understands. And one of the quotes I always love from Dean Smith is, during the season, it's about the team. During the off season, it's about the individual. And a lot of coaches don't have that luxury, especially in this, you got to win now era. So again, we're not going to solve anything with anything other than better educational tools, recruiting character, and then hopefully making the connection between what you're saying and why it's in their best interest to follow through and to be a responsible citizen, be a responsible caretaker of the financial opportunities that NIL provides. And If we have parents that can play a positive role in that, that makes this so much better.
Amazing we said. Micah, quickly close us out. Say what you said.
Oh, I was just going to say amen to that, Mark and George. I think a lot of it is about the transformational coach as well as program and really knowing your athletes, because you want grit, tenacity, a competitive person. You want that on the court, but are you ready for it off the court? And are you ready to see why they are like that? Because I think a lot of the great athlete qualities come from not so great situations, and coaches need to be aware of that and how to navigate that and also protect their players.
Well, thank you so much. This has been an amazing conversation. I'm so grateful to be a part of it. And thank you guys for joining us. Thanks to the amazing panelists. And feel free, you know, if we didn't answer your question or if you have follow-ups, I'm positive Jeremy can connect us with any of you. So we'd love to continue the conversation. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you.